March 2000. A thick, humid air enveloped the Catfish Swamp on the outskirts of Millhaven, South Carolina, where a group of workers was digging foundations for a new paper mill. The golden light from the excavator's lamps pierced through the early morning fog, illuminating the ground that had been silent for over half a century until the drill struck metal. Base. We need police and forensics out here now. There's a buried vehicle, and it looks like there are human bones. The supervisor's voice crackled over the radio, mingling with the sound of drizzle and wind sweeping through the swamp. What began as a routine workday had now become a discovery that would shake all of Jasper County. What was pulled from the earth wasn't just a rusted frame, it was the ghost of a disappearance South Carolina had tried to forget. The Grace Baptist Church van, missing along with 17 people since the summer of 1946, had returned. But no one was left alive to tell the story. For over half a century, the people of Millhaven believed they died in a storm-related accident, swept away by water, buried in mud, and forgiven by time. The case was closed, the questions buried under layers of swampy earth around Catfish Swamp. Before we continue this haunting story, please hit subscribe and like the video, because cold cases like this are only revisited when we keep their memory from being buried too. Your support helps forgotten stories find justice for those who are gone. The discovery in Millhaven didn't just reopen a missing persons case, it was the first domino to topple a wall of silence that had stood for 54 years. As modern investigators began digging into the files, they uncovered things previous generations overlooked: mismatched wood fragments, Goodyear tire tracks from another vehicle, and a bunker on land leased by Whitford Timber, the wealthiest company in the area. When investigators found old maps, material invoices, and a handwritten plan titled Plan for Ransom, the name Frederick Whitford Jr. kept surfacing. The man once seen as Millhaven's pride, the son of a prominent lumber baron who funded the church, schools, and lived at the heart of the community he betrayed. This case isn't just about a vehicle buried underground. It's about how an entire small town chose silence in the face of power. When 17 people vanished in the night, no one asked too many questions, no one suspected the Whitford family, and for over half a century, prayers, school photos hung in the church, and reassurances of God's will replaced justice. What makes the Millhaven case particularly haunting isn't just the scale of the crime, but the gap between truth and belief. The perpetrator didn't hide in the shadows. He lived among them, greeted them daily, donated to the church, and attended memorials for the very people he buried alive. Where are you watching from today? Leave your location in the comments below. I always want to know how far stories like this travel, and how many other communities across America might be carrying their own unexcavated Millhaven. Tonight, we'll return to the summer of 1946. Tracing the last van to leave the Grace Baptist camp, following the scattered investigations, and stepping into a journey spanning over half a century to uncover the deepest buried truth in South Carolina's history. This is a story of loss, power, a town's enduring silence, and justice, late but never lost. Summer 1946, Millhaven, South Carolina, was a small town nestled among cotton fields and pine forests, stretching along the Savannah River. Life here was peaceful, everyone knew each other, and the Grace Baptist Church was the community's heart, hosting everything from Sunday services to summer classes for children. The final day of that year's summer camp ended in high spirits, with kids carrying their drawings and bags of cookies, while mothers waited under the shade of oak trees in the churchyard. The church's pale yellow wooden van, a familiar sight that transported students every summer, was started by driver Edwin Rayburn, a World War II veteran, late that afternoon. Accompanying him was young teacher Ruby Mae Carter, 23, beloved by the town for her kindness and dedication. 15 students climbed into the van's bed, sitting on simple wooden benches, their laughter echoing along the dusty red road leading out of the camp. Townsfolk along River Bluff waved as the van passed, some recognizing Ruby and Rayburn, nodding in familiar greeting. That was the last time anyone saw the van. As it crossed the Catfish Bridge, the sky turned leaden, heavy clouds signaling an approaching storm. Many later said the sky darkened quickly, winds picked up, and the dirt road was coated with damp dust and the scent of pine resin. Evening passed with no sign of the van's return. As the church clock ticked past dinner time, families gathered on porches, staring down the empty road where faint yellow lights flickered. At first, they assumed the van was stuck in mud, or Rayburn had stopped to wait out the rain somewhere. But as time dragged on, reassurances grew hollow. When the rain stopped and the roads dried, yet the churchyard remained silent without the familiar engine's hum, anxiety began to spread. A few tried calling the camp, but no one answered. Some parents walked the old road, flashlights in hand, calling their children's names into the wind. By midnight, the Grace Baptist pastor returned to the church office, where an old desk phone sat on a dark wooden table. He dialed the Millhaven police station and said curtly that the church van, along with everyone on board, had vanished without a trace. On the other end, Sheriff Howard Briggs went quiet for a moment before asking for details. He had the pastor list the names of those on the van, the departure time, and the return route. Hanging up, Briggs looked out the window. Rain was falling heavily now, gusts carrying the salty dampness from Catfish Swamp down Main Street. He pulled on a raincoat, called 2 on-duty officers, and ordered them to bring storm lanterns, maps, and rescue gear. Word spread fast, and within minutes, a few locals from near the church showed up at the station, peppering him with questions about the kids. Briggs reassured them. It was likely just a temporary loss of contact, but his eyes betrayed his concern. He quickly noted the passenger list: 15 students, teacher Ruby Mae Carter, and driver Edwin Rayburn. The only plausible route was River Bluff, passing over Catfish Bridge before looping back to town. He knew that road well, a narrow, red dirt path that often flooded in heavy rain. Minutes later, 3 police cars and a truck carrying volunteer militia set out into the night. The rain grew thicker, headlights reflecting off slick roads. At the turn onto River Bluff, Briggs rolled down his window, the lantern's beam sweeping across rows of pines as wind carried the scent of wet resin and mud. They stopped several times to check for tire tracks, finding only patches of eroded earth. Near midnight, they reached Catfish Bridge. Briggs and 2 men stepped out, their storm lanterns scanning the soaked wooden planks. No signs of a crash, no debris, just murky water churning below. He sent men along the swamp's edge, searching for any trace of the vehicle or floating belongings. One officer found a small piece of glass, possibly from a headlight, which was bagged and logged. But beyond that, nothing. As dawn approached, Briggs called off the search for the night. Back at the church, oil lamps still burned, mothers huddled on the steps, their coats soaked, his voice hoarse from the cold. Briggs announced they hadn't found the van or its passengers, the rain had hindered the search, and more help would come from Beaufort in the morning. The crowd fell silent, only the wind whistling through the halls and the smell of damp smoke lingering. As he left the church, Briggs noted in the log, no vehicle or witnesses found. Possible incident in low-lying swamp area. Expand search in the morning. Dawn broke, the rain had eased, but the ground remained waterlogged. A thick morning fog blanketed the pines along River Bluff, creating a misty haze. Sheriff Howard Briggs was at the scene with 6 officers and a group of local militia. Pointing at a map spread on a truck's hood, he divided the search into 3 areas: the main road from Catfish Bridge to the camp, the southern swamp, and the high ground near an abandoned lumber mill. The groups fanned out, carrying shovels, lanterns, and evidence bags. Briggs took the bridge route, where the previous night's search had yielded nothing. In the morning light, details unseen at night emerged. Eroded road surfaces, long streaks of mud, and deep round tire tracks. An officer measured the tracks, comparing them to the church van size. They matched. The tracks stretched over 20 meters, then veered sharply right, where the earth was packed tighter than usual. Briggs signaled a pause, inspecting the area with his boot. Near a drainage ditch, something glinted in the light. An officer picked it up. A small, sharp-edged piece of glass with a silver rim, likely from a headlight. A few meters away, they found a piece of pale yellow wood, its paint chipped, matching the van's siding. Briggs had both items bagged, labeled, and placed in a metal box. Continuing the sweep, they found another set of tire tracks overlapping the van's, but wider with a different tread. A former military officer recognized the pattern as Goodyear, used on 2-ton GMC trucks, rare and expensive for the rural area at the time. These tracks ran parallel to the vans, then diverged, leaving deep mud grooves, suggesting a heavy load. Briggs frowned, noting second vehicle present at the scene, not coincidental. He ordered measurements of the distance between the tracks, which were less than 2 meters apart, too close for chance. Following the road's edge, they found a dark frayed rope draped over grass, one end worn as if tied tightly. Nearby was a torn green cloth in the mud, possibly a student's uniform sleeve. Briggs carefully bagged both with tweezers. His gaze settled on the low ground to the road's left, where grass was flattened, and heavy boot prints marked the mud. High-top leather boots, size 11 or 12, clearly not Rayburn's smaller shoes. He ordered photos of the prints from multiple angles and tracked their direction. The prints appeared sporadically, then vanished toward the pines. An officer remarked the walker had a steady, wide stride, likely a large man. Briggs silently logged every detail, staring down the flooded road. The pieces formed a darker picture. The van hadn't simply vanished in a storm. Something, or someone, had forced it to stop. As the sun rose, the group returned to report. On a makeshift wooden table, Briggs laid out the evidence: glass, van siding, rope, cloth, boot print photos, and tire track sketches. He reviewed each item meticulously, adding to the morning's report. Scene suggests the vehicle was stopped or forced to stop. Presence of at least one other vehicle, likely an adult male involved. No signs of mechanical failure. The group stood silent, only the sound of his pen scratching paper. No one said it aloud, but everyone knew the case had outgrown a routine search. As Briggs closed his notebook, faint sunlight filtered through the clouds, reflecting off puddles on the road. The deep tire tracks still there, like evidence of something sinister that had unfolded on this seemingly familiar path. That afternoon, after completing the collection of evidence, Sheriff Howard Briggs gathered everyone who might have seen the church van on the River Bluff route. The makeshift meeting room was set up in the small hall of Millhaven's town hall, where the air was thick with dampness and cigarette smoke. Witnesses were called in one by one. The first was Mrs. Martha Collins, who lived in a wooden house near Catfish Bridge. She confirmed seeing the church van pass by late the previous afternoon. According to her, the van stopped at the bridge's entrance, its engine still running, then suddenly shut off. From her window, she saw an unfamiliar man step out from the other side of the road and walk around the front of the van. Then the rain started, and she had to close her window, seeing nothing more. When Briggs asked about the man's vehicle, she recalled only that it was light-colored with a covered cargo bed, like a lumber truck, but newer. The next testimony came from Mr. Benjamin Ross, owner of the gas station at the end of River Bluff. He clearly remembered two vehicles passing by not long apart that afternoon. First, the familiar pale yellow church van, then a white truck with no license plate, covered in dust, moving unusually slowly. Ross added that as the white truck passed, he noticed at least two men in the cab, both wearing fedoras and not looking toward the road. The police recorded the description: white truck, covered cargo bed, two men, heading toward Catfish Bridge. Another witness, a young fisherman named Carl Peterson, was brought to the station for questioning. He said while tying nets at a bend in the river near the bridge, he heard an engine roar, then abruptly stop, followed by a loud metallic crash, like two heavy objects colliding. He intended to check the shore, but a sudden downpour forced him to seek shelter, and when he returned, the road was empty. No vehicles or people. The separate testimonies, though not entirely consistent, all pointed to a brief window just before the rain started, and all mentioned a white truck near where the church van stopped. The police checked gas stations in the area for vehicles matching the description, but found no leads. That evening at the Millhaven station, Briggs and investigator Rowe spread a map of the area across a table, marking with red pushpins every location the witnesses mentioned. Ross's gas station, Collins' house, the river bend where Peterson fished, and the road where tire tracks were found that morning. Connecting the points revealed a short 3-mile stretch, the likely area where the church van vanished. Briggs drew a small circle around the abandoned Whitford timber lumber mill nearby, a site he'd noted earlier, and lingered over the map. He noticed the church van's path ended abruptly at the intersection of the dirt road and a turnoff to the mill, where the different tire tracks were found that morning. Rose suggested sketching a hypothetical timeline. The church van left the camp, traveled steadily to the bridge, was stopped by another vehicle, then forced onto a side road. Briggs ordered a review of all large truck permits in Jasper County to match the witness's description of the white truck. In the summary report sent to the county office, he wrote clearly, "Witness testimonies confirm the presence of a second vehicle at the location and time of the disappearance. Goodyear tire tracks and compacted soil align with witness reports. The likelihood of a simple accident is low. There is basis to suspect intentional vehicle obstruction or forced stopping." At the end of the report, he added a brief note, "Recommend expanding investigation toward criminal activity." As Briggs closed his notebook, outside the thunder had stopped, but heavy clouds lingered. The River Bluff Road remained waterlogged, eerily quiet, as if it had just swallowed something the town dared not speak aloud. The next morning, after the witness report was sent to the county, Sheriff Howard Briggs and investigator Leonard Rowe decided to expand the search to Catfish Swamp and the land around Whitford Timber Co. S. Mill, about 2 miles west of Catfish Bridge. This low, marshy area was thick with trees and had only a single dirt trail leading to the old mill, abandoned since the war. Whitford Timber was Jasper County's largest logging company, owned by the Whitford family, a name considered the economic backbone of Millhaven. Searching this area required caution, but Briggs saw no more viable leads. He led a team of 4 officers and 2 locals familiar with the terrain. The trail to the mill was overgrown with weeds, and in many spots, police vehicles spun their tires to push through thick mud. Near the mill's central area, where a lumber warehouse once stood, Rose spotted fresh tire tracks on soft ground, clearly made within the last few days. He measured the track spacing and tread, comparing them to the Goodyear tracks photographed the day before. They matched perfectly. This tread was exclusive to 2-ton GMC trucks, the same type, owned by Whitford Timber. Briggs ordered the scene documented, plaster casts made, and positions numbered. As the team moved deeper, they noticed a wide patch of land near the swamp's edge had been leveled, its surface showing fresh shovel marks, as if recently dug and refilled. The soil was darker, mixed with wood chips and pine bark. One officer noted this area wasn't part of the mill's usual operations, as there were no old warehouse or equipment traces nearby. Briggs walked the new ground, probing it with a shovel handle. It sank easily, indicating a hollow space below. He ordered a preliminary measurement. The area spanned about 20 square meters, large enough to hide a van. When Rose suggested excavating, Briggs hesitated. He knew digging without a warrant could render evidence inadmissible, and the unstable terrain risked collapsing under heavy equipment, destroying any traces. After a quick discussion, they decided to only document the site, take panoramic photos, and mark it on the map. Rowe drove a small wooden stake into the edge of the patch, labeled MHV5, and took close-up photos with a Rolleiflex camera. North of the mill, they found an old wooden shed, its door locked with rusted wire. Inside were empty gas cans, old rope, and muddy boot prints. The items were sealed, but couldn't be dated. As the team left, Briggs stood silently, staring at the dirt trail to the mill. He knew the Whitford family had wide connections, and any move could draw attention. Back at the station, he drafted a preliminary report for the Jasper County Sheriff's Office. In the internal notes section, he wrote in bold, Need warrant to search Whitford timber mill if further evidence emerges. Leveled area shows signs of recent disturbance. GMC Goodyear tracks match Whitford's vehicles. Briggs signed, stamped, and locked the file in a desk drawer. He knew the next step needed stronger evidence, but his gut told him the answer to the disappearance lay in that mill. That afternoon, he returned to Grace Baptist Church to update the pastor and families. No one asked for investigation details. Their eyes reflected faint hope. Briggs responded with silence, his mind fixed on the leveled patch by the swamp, where the wet mud might be hiding something the town didn't want to know. In the day's summary report, he added a brief note. Insufficient evidence to conclude, but the site is likely directly tied to the disappearance. Over the next 2 days, all evidence from Catfish Swamp and the Whitford timber mill was transferred to the Millhaven station for analysis. A small room behind the police office served as a temporary evidence locker, reeking of mud, damp wood, and lingering diesel from sealed bags. Sheriff Howard Briggs and investigator Leonard Rowe personally cataloged each item. On a wooden table, evidence bags were numbered. Headlight glass, yellow-painted wood, rope, torn green cloth, and photos of boot and tire tracks. A county technician arrived with chemicals and a UV lamp to test the paint and fabric. The wood fragment was cleaned with a mild solution and compared to samples from the church van. The results differed starkly. The van's wood was soft white pine, while the fragment was denser oak, used in commercial or military vehicles. The paint didn't match either. The church van had pale yellow, while the fragment bore a yellow-brown coat over a silver-gray industrial primer. The initial report concluded the wood wasn't from the Grace Baptist van. The glass fragment had a sharper curve than the 1939 Ford van's headlight, suggesting a newer model, possibly GMC or Chevrolet. The rope was frayed from moisture, but thickly braided, used for securing heavy loads. The boot prints, cast in plaster, showed Red Wing, made in USA on the sole, a large, expensive work boot rare in rural areas. The torn cloth, examined under a magnifying glass, revealed thick cotton weave, not from a student's uniform, but likely a man's jacket. The data was compiled into a comparison chart, with Rowe's note, "No evidence directly ties to the church's vehicle or passengers." All point to a group of adults with prepared vehicles and tools. The initial findings made that afternoon's internal meeting tense. 3 hypotheses were formally discussed. First, an accident. The church van skidded in the storm and sank into low ground, possibly buried in mud. Briggs raised this first, as it fit the weather and lack of direct witnesses. Second, kidnapping for ransom, based on the strange vehicle and signs of forced stopping. But 3 days had passed without a ransom note or call, casting doubt. Third, vehicle theft, a group targeting the van or its cargo, though the church vehicle carried nothing valuable, making this unlikely. As the meeting ended, Briggs wrote in the minutes, "Lacking physical evidence of criminal activity, highest probability is an accident due to weather, but other factors not ruled out." He leaned toward the simplest explanation, but Rowe disagreed. After the others left, Rowe stayed at the table, studying the Goodyear track photos and measurements of the vehicle's proximity. He noted the tracks overlapped in the direction of the church van, only possible if the second vehicle followed closely, not a chance encounter. The rope and oak wood suggested preparation, not accident debris. Rowe submitted a brief memo to Briggs, writing, "Evidence doesn't match the church van, but aligns with another vehicle type. Likely an organized act to stop the van and move its occupants elsewhere. Recommend reviewing investigation as planned criminal activity." Briggs read it, didn't respond immediately, folded the paper, and tucked it into the case file, saying he'd send it to the county for review. But as Rowe left, Briggs set the memo aside, looking weary. Outside, dusk cast a pale light over Millhaven, the croaking of frogs from Catfish Swamp, a steady reminder of something unresolved. In his end-of-day log, Briggs wrote briefly, "Evidence analysis. Origin unclear, no firm conclusions. Current direction, accident due to heavy rain." Over a week had passed since the church van disappeared, and Millhaven remained drenched in rain. Successive summer storms caused the Savannah River to swell, flooding much of Catfish Swamp and washing away the faint traces left from earlier searches. Sheriff Howard Briggs was nearly out of resources. The search team had to pause multiple times due to flooded roads, impassable for vehicles, and the pump sent from the county malfunctioned. When the water receded, thick mud covered everything, erasing tire tracks and footprints entirely. The collected evidence led to no new breakthroughs. No additional witnesses came forward, no anonymous letters arrived, and no signs suggested the van was towed or stolen. Families grew impatient but had nowhere to turn. At Grace Baptist Church, prayer gatherings grew quieter, with only a few attending each evening, sitting under flickering oil lamps. Briggs continued regular reports to Jasper County, but the response was merely to await further results. State police sent no additional support, citing insufficient evidence of criminal activity. The three hypotheses discussed earlier remained on the table: accident, kidnapping, or vehicle theft. Briggs ruled out ransom due to lack of motive, dismissed theft, since the van carried nothing valuable, and leaned heavily toward a storm-related accident. He believed the van likely slid into low ground near the swamp, buried in mud, impossible to locate. The final investigation team meeting was held in the small office of the Millhaven station on the 12th day since the disappearance was reported. On the table were the route map, black and white photos of tire tracks in the lumber mill, and a stack of worn case files. Briggs read the summary aloud. After 12 days of searching, no evidence has located the vehicle or passengers. Initial signs suggest the vehicle may have been swept away or stuck in the swamp. No specific criminal evidence found. He looked up, voice low. For now, we'll treat this as a storm accident. No one objected, though Leonard Rose stayed silent. After the meeting, Briggs signed the order to close the case, assigning it number MHV-27. One copy was sent to the county office for archiving, another he personally placed in the station safe. In the report's conclusion, he wrote briefly, "Vehicle and bodies not found. Presumed cause, natural disaster." Rose stood nearby, watching the words without comment. Deep down, he felt unsettled. The matching tire tracks, the leveled ground, the dark rope, all pointed away from an accident. But Briggs had decided, and higher-ups would back him. Outside, rain fell again. The sound of it hitting the tin roof blended with the steady tick of the wall clock. An emptiness spread through the room, as if the whole town was sinking into silence. That afternoon, Briggs sent a final telegram to Jasper County, stating, "Search concluded, no basis for further investigation." The case was officially closed, sealed in a brown folder, stamped red with "Case closed," and loaded onto a county vehicle for the archive. As the vehicle drove off, water splashed on the road, and Briggs stood on the station steps, watching for a long time. He felt relief at duty fulfilled, but vaguely sensed something unexplained had been buried with the swamp's mud. In his final daily log, he wrote briefly, "Grace Baptist Church van disappearance, concluded, storm accident. Case MHV-27 archived in Jasper County." The thin, neat handwriting closed nearly 2 weeks of effort, leaving behind a heavy silence over Millhaven, where only the rain on rooftops and questions no one dared ask remained. After case MHV-27 was closed, Millhaven slowly returned to normal, as if the disappearance never happened. In the following weeks, local papers stopped reporting, and Grace Baptist Church ceased mentioning Ruby Mae Carter in services. The new pastor urged the congregation to see this as God's test, and the townsfolk quietly accepted that the summer storm had claimed 17 lives. From 1947 through the 1970s, the case was never reopened. It survived only in fragmented stories shared at coffee shops or on porches during heavy rains over Catfish Swamp. Sheriff Howard Briggs retired in 1952, moving to Greenville with his son. His notebook joined hundreds of others in a drawer, untouched. Investigator Leonard Rowe left law enforcement soon after, working for an insurance company. He twice requested to reopen the case, but received no response. In Jasper County, the archive held thousands of old cases, and MHV-27 was just a thin file in a row of rotting wooden cabinets, gathering dust. In 1957, a major fire sparked by an electrical fault swept through the Southern Archive room. Flames consumed most 1940s records. When contained, only a few singed files remained, including MHV-27. Most investigation notes, scene photos, and Briggs's records were destroyed, leaving only the cover page with a faint Grace Baptist bus accident, July 1946. The incident was noted briefly in an internal report. Document damage insignificant. No one in the county mentioned it again. Around that time, Whitford Timber Company bought the Catfish Swamp area from local authorities to expand logging. The Whitford family, longtime owners of the mill across the river, built a large warehouse and new transport roads. The swamp's land was leveled, pine forests felled, and old road traces nearly vanished. Some elderly townsfolk, seeing Whitford's trucks on River Bluff, recalled the old story, but younger generations saw it as a sad tale from the past. By the 1960s, it was simply called the Summer Storm Tragedy. In public records, it was grouped with natural disasters, storms, floods, landslides, no longer tied to criminal investigation. At Grace Baptist Church, an annual memorial was held, but victims' names were no longer listed. A few faded photos of the children hung in the old classroom, their wooden frames weathered. By the early 1970s, Whitford Timber completed a new warehouse on the swamp's edge, where River Bluff once ended. White-painted GMC trucks rolled through the same road the church van had taken. Millhaven grew accustomed to the site, and the old story faded. When asked, older residents only said 1946's storm was bad. Everyone thought they were swept away. Over time, the memory dissolved into the town's daily life, focused on the future. The singed, incomplete MHV-27 file sat among thousands in Jasper County's iron cabinets, waiting over 3 decades, forgotten. In 2000, over half a century after the church van disappearance was deemed a storm accident, Catfish Swamp had transformed. Whitford Timber ceased operations. The swampland was sold to Southeastern Pulp Company, a Charleston-based industrial paper company. In March, the company began clearing ground for a new factory, located exactly where the old lumber warehouse stood, its soil compacted from years of heavy trucks. On the morning of March 14th, the second foundation digging crew drilled deep for a drainage system. At over 2 meters, the third drill hit something hard, emitting a metallic clang. Thinking it was an old pipe, workers scooped the area, revealing black mud, a bent iron bar, and rotted wood with pale yellow paint. The excavator operator stopped, climbed down, and realized the frame wasn't a pipe, but part of a vehicle. Clearing more mud, he saw small white bone fragments in the murky water. The site erupted in chaos. The shift manager, a local, recognized the gravity and halted all work, ordering workers back. Within an hour, Millhaven police arrived, cordoned off the area, filed a report, and sent an urgent notice to Jasper County. Mud-caked scoops were sealed, and the site was secured within a 50-meter radius. By midday, sunlight revealed a rusted steel frame, wheels sunk into the earth, and wooden pieces in the mud, resembling a truck's cargo bed. The local sheriff, Mark Henderson, born after the 1946 accident, didn't know the old case, but suspected a crime upon hearing yellow-painted vehicle, human bones. That afternoon, he contacted Jasper County and the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division, SLED. The report was marked Level 1 urgent due to potential human remains. By evening, SLED confirmed a forensic team from Columbia would arrive within 24 hours. News of the discovery spread fast. Elderly residents recalled the old story, saying the swamp wasn't right since the church van. Local papers sent reporters photographing the cordon amid rumors of a war-era buried vehicle. That night, county authorities halted all construction, allowing only forensic access the next morning. At 7 a.m. on March 15th, SLED's crime scene team arrived with metal detectors, GPS, and biosample bags. Forensic technicians set up a tent, marking the initial find with red plastic stakes. After draining water, the truck's bed emerged, a rusted steel frame with yellow-painted wood. Under floodlights, faint lettering on the side read Grace Baptist Church, Millhaven, nearly obscured by mud. The match stunned Henderson. He ordered all activity paused and notified SLED. It was likely the 1946 missing van. By noon, forensics uncovered the rear compartment, finding items in the mud, dark fabric, a leather shoe fragment, buttons, and at least 3 large bones, showing crush marks. A technician noted, bones fractured under pressure, not sharp trauma. All were collected sterilely, placed in specialized containers for transport to Columbia's lab. Jasper County Police and SLED opened a new cold case file, coded 2000-1476, classified as suspected criminal activity, linked to 1946 mass disappearance. That day, authorities issued a brief press release, vehicle frame and suspected human remains found at Catfish Swamp, Jasper County. Investigation ongoing. Elderly Millhaven residents gathered at the cordon, whispering names like Ruby Mae Carter and Edwin Rayburn, names faded to dim memory. That night, police lights glowed around the swamp, the smell of wet mud mixed with rising mist, clouding the beams. In Sheriff Henderson's log, the day's final entry was carefully written, pale yellow truck frame, identified as Grace Baptist Church. Human bones found in cargo bed, site secured, SLED leading investigation. At the page's end, he added, this may not be just an accident, as once believed. The official excavation began the morning of March 16, 2000, under SLED's forensic team from Columbia and Jasper County Sheriff's Office. The sky was overcast, fog blanketed the swamp, and the air was still, broken only by the hum of water pumps. The secured area was fenced off, press kept half a mile away, mud was removed slowly, centimeters at a time, to preserve the structure below. As water drained, the vehicle emerged, a 1939 Ford converted into a wooden truck, typical for rural student transport. Its pale yellow paint was peeling, but Grace Baptist Church, Millhaven was legible under sight lights. Forensics recorded continuously, numbering each structural part. The hood was dented, the windshield shattered. But the cab remained intact. The doors were sealed shut, filled with thick mud. When pried open, the first adult skeleton was found slumped in the driver's seat, hands still on the broken steering wheel. A rusted pocket watch was found in the coat. Its face stopped at 5:19. Inside the driver's jacket, technicians found a wet envelope wrapped in oilcloth. The ink was blurred, but words were legible. If anyone finds this, please tell them, I tried to keep the children calm. We are being locked in. The faint signature read, E. Rayburn. Briggs was long gone, but the note cut back to when Millhaven believed it ended in a storm. As the team opened the cargo bed, they used small saws and lifting tools to remove rotted planks. Inside was a sealed 2.5-meter wide compartment, filled with thick mud. After pumping out water, the sight silenced everyone. Numerous bones piled together, mostly small children's, mixed with 2 adult skeletons. In total, 16 remains matched the list of 15 students, teacher Ruby Mae Carter, and driver Edwin Rayburn. Forensics worked 3 days to separate and label each bone, transferring them to tagged biobags. Initial analysis showed no bullet wounds, no sharp trauma, or crash-related fractures. Many skulls were crushed by compression, not direct impact. The cargo bed's wooden ceiling was reinforced with thin steel, window gaps sealed with thick planks and black paint. A small steel pipe ran from the cab to the compartment, likely an air vent. But it was bent and clogged with mud and wood, blocking airflow when buried. Forensics concluded the bed was intentionally sealed from outside, turned into a confinement chamber. In the back corner, they found a rotted wooden board, etched with a shaky inscription, "Deliver us from this dark." The wood was specially sealed as key evidence. Air sample analysis showed high CO2 and severe oxygen depletion at the time of collapse. Based on bone positions and scratch marks inside the planks, forensics concluded the victims died of asphyxiation, likely over hours before the structure collapsed. No signs of binding suggested they initially hoped to escape. In the scene report, lead forensic expert Dr. Harold Cummings wrote, "The confinement chamber was deliberately designed, not a natural accident. Saw marks, bolts, and waterproof paint indicate skilled technical work. At the pit's edge, they found a severed rope with frayed ends, possibly used to lower or pull the vehicle into the hole. The truck was dismantled, cleaned, photographed, and sent for reconstruction. When finished, the ground lay bare, a 3-meter-deep pit with a muddy stench. On the final evening, as remains were removed, the forensic team held a brief prayer. The official report to Columbia concluded in bold, cause of death, asphyxiation, in a sealed space. Structural evidence confirms, cargo bed intentionally sealed, not a mechanical accident. Determined as confinement leading to death. Results were sent to the state prosecutor's office on March 20th. The once deemed accident was reclassified, criminal act, perpetrator unidentified. At a brief Jasper County press conference, Sheriff Henderson read, "The people in the van didn't die in a storm. They were confined until death." The statement silenced the room, as if 54 years of the town's history collapsed in an afternoon. Under camera lights, the etched wooden board and rotted envelope sat on the table, silent proof that what Millhaven called a storm accident was a meticulously hidden crime for half a century. Immediately after the forensic report was released, SLED formed an expanded investigation team to trace the origins of the area where the van was buried. The Columbia headquarters sent an urgent request to the Jasper County Land Registry Office to retrieve all cadastral records related to Catfish Swamp from 1940 to 1950. After days of review, archivists found old tax maps, yellowed paper marked with lot numbers in purple ink. On the 1946 map, the site where the van was found lay within Lot 4B, leased to Whitford Timber Company under a 20-year contract starting February 1943. Notably, the attached technical diagram showed not only logging transport routes, but also a bunker labeled storage pit for dry lumber and flammable materials. According to records, this pit was located at the swamp's edge, precisely matching the current excavation site. This meant the bunker existed 3 years before the disappearance, not formed naturally. When the investigation team visited the county archives, they found a thin file documenting Whitford Timber's 1945 permit to dredge Catfish Swamp for warehouse expansion. The permit, signed by Millhaven authorities, was issued months before the disappearance. SLED's geographic technicians compared the old maps with World War II. The grainy black and white images clearly showed the bunker, a large square pit with a wooden roof and a truck access path, photographed on June 17, 1944, 2 years before the church van vanished. GPS analysis confirmed the pit's location matched the 2000 excavation site with only a few meters discrepancy. The team concluded the bunker was not a natural landslide, it was a man-made structure under Whitford Timber's control at the time. The report sent to Columbia stated, "The excavation site lies within the boundaries of land leased by Whitford Timber Company in 1946. The bunker was constructed and used prior to the disappearance. It's likely an old industrial facility repurposed for another use." Concurrently, the team reviewed Whitford Timber's administrative records. The 1946 personnel list included Frederick Whitford Jr., the 24-year-old son of the company owner, responsible for overseeing the mill and operating heavy machinery. He had studied mechanical engineering in Charleston, with expertise in designing warehouses and internal transport routes. This brought the Whitford name back into SLED's internal reports, underlined in red. At a meeting in Columbia, lead investigator Captain Laura McKinnon presented the site's schematics, the 1944 aerial bunker photo, the 1946 tax map, and a 2000 satellite image, all nearly perfectly aligned. Pointing to a circled spot in the swamp, she said curtly, "This is the only place capable of hiding a large vehicle undetected." SLED's consolidated report concluded initially, the bunker where the church van was found was entirely on land leased by Whitford Timber Company. In 1946, deliberately built and used during that period. This was the first legal evidence linking the crime scene to a specific business entity. The conclusion marked a turning point, shifting the case from presumed accident remains to a clear direction. Whitford Timber became the focal point of the entire investigation. Once the cadastral report confirmed the bunker was on Whitford Timber's leased land, SLED's team shifted focus to finding financial and physical evidence directly tied to Frederick Whitford Jr., the mill manager in 1946. The agency issued a subpoena to First Savannah Trust Bank for Whitford Timbers and Whitford's personal account records from 1945 to 1947. It took nearly 2 weeks for archivists to locate handwritten ledgers, their ink nearly faded. When magnified and cross-referenced, analysts found an unusual withdrawal on July 12, 1946. 3 days before the van's disappearance, the $1,200 cash withdrawal, a significant sum then, was made directly by Whitford Jr., signed in full bypassing the company. The transaction record noted only cash disbursement with no purpose listed. SLED cross-checked tax records and industrial purchase receipts from the period. A week later, a State Commerce Archive employee found a set of old Whitford Timber invoices in a Charleston storage facility, including 3 dated July 13 and 14, 1946. All signed by Frederick Whitford Jr., the first invoice recorded purchase of heavy rope, 200 feet, Brunswick Rope Company, the second diesel fuel, 60 gallons, and the third oak lumber, 50 board feet. All 3 items matched materials found at the excavation: rope, fuel, and oak wood used to reinforce the van's cargo bed. SLED compiled a chart proving these supplies were purchased just before the church van's disappearance. Meanwhile, another team searched the Whitford family's archive in Millhaven under a court order. The 2-story wooden house, deep in the old company grounds, had been unoccupied for years, maintained only by an occasional caretaker. In the basement, behind old file cabinets, investigators found a Mosler safe with peeling silver-gray paint. Opened with specialized tools, it contained moldy documents, mostly 1940s accounting ledgers and logging contracts. In the last compartment, they found a thick envelope with a folded, yellowed stack of papers, the handwriting still legible. The first page bore a black ink title, Plan for Ransom. Below were 4 detailed pages outlining steps. 1. Transport vehicle, use Ford logging truck. 2. Holding location, storage pit, at Swamp. 3. Student list, 15. 4. Accompanying persons, teacher, driver. 5. Ransom demand, $50,000 from South Carolina, contact via telegram. The plan was initialed FW at the bottom. Inside the envelope was a separate list of 15 names, mostly matching the Grace Baptist Summer Camp roster, cross-referenced with church records. The documents were sealed and sent to SLED's Columbia Document Analysis Lab for handwriting comparison. Experts compared the FW signature and handwriting on the 1946 invoices with Whitford Jr. Slater, tax records. Results showed a 96% match, including unique traits like the hook on the R, a hyphen linking double T as, and Whitford's looped initial style. The analysis concluded, highly likely the plan for ransom and student list were written by Frederick Whitford Jr., the same person who signed the 1946 invoices. Simultaneously, technicians tested the paper and ink, confirming the use of Parker Superchrome ink, common from 1945 to 1948, reinforcing the document's age. At a subsequent internal meeting, Captain Laura McKinnon presented the evidence chain, the cash withdrawal 3 days before the disappearance, purchased materials matching those at the scene, and the handwritten plan for ransom. She concluded, there's no doubt Whitford Timber not only controlled the land, but was directly involved in preparations for the incident. The report to SLED's director confirmed this was the first time in over half a century that financial and physical evidence fully aligned with the crime scene. Frederick Whitford Jr. S name was underlined in red on the priority investigation list. Noted as likely planner and coordinator. As the file was sealed, the meeting room fell silent. The once disjointed pieces of the 1946 storm accident were coming together, all pointing to one name: Whitford. After the financial and handwritten evidence was verified, SLED's team sought living witnesses who worked for Whitford Timber in 1946. Company tax records listed over 40 workers, most deceased. Only 3 were alive in 2000, all over 70. One name stood out: Earl Chambers, born 1922, a former excavator operator at the Catfish Mill, now the excavation site. Records noted he quit in August 1946. A month after the disappearance, investigator Laura McKinnon and her partner were sent to Ridgeland, where Chambers lived with his daughter. The small house sat at the edge of a pine forest, its tin roof rusted but the garden well kept. When McKinnon introduced herself and the visit's purpose, the old man was silent for a long moment before slowly inviting them into the living room. An old wooden table held plow repair tools, showing he still did odd jobs despite his age. After brief health talk, McKinnon placed a 1944 black and white aerial photo of the Catfish Mill bunker, obtained from military archives, on the table. Chambers nodded, confirming it was the mill. When she showed a photo of the excavated church van, he gripped the chair arms, silent for a while before whispering, "I knew this day would come," he began, voice slow but clear. On the night of July 15, 1946, Chambers was called to the mill for overtime work to move some lumber crates into the pit. Frederick Whitford Jr. summoned him. At the site, he saw 2 other men, later identified as the Sloan brothers, Whitford timber transport workers. In the headlight glow, he noticed a pale yellow van parked at the pit's entrance, unlike the usual logging trucks. Whitford said curtly, "This vehicle needs to be kept safe overnight. Someone will retrieve it tomorrow." When Chambers asked why it was stored in the pit, Whitford replied, "Don't want outsiders snooping." Chambers recalled hearing faint noises from the van's cargo bed, like soft tapping or muffled cries. He asked, but Whitford snapped, "Don't worry, it's just cargo." The other 2 helped Whitford tie ropes around the van's bed, while Chambers operated the excavator to lower it into the pit. Once the van was inside, Whitford signaled to stop, told him to shut off the machine, and get coffee. Chambers left for about 10 minutes, but when he returned, the pit was partially filled, with Whitford sweating beside the excavator. When asked what they were doing, Whitford said, "Big rain's coming, we're shoring it up to prevent collapse." Chambers added that he overheard Whitford mention ransom and waiting for a telegram response to the Sloans, words he didn't understand then, but never forgot. After the job, Whitford paid him $20, triple his daily wage, and warned him to tell no one. The next morning, Chambers returned to find the area temporarily sealed, with a danger, pit collapse risk sign at the gate. He asked the company manager why, who said it was a safety measure, mentioning nothing about the previous night. Days later, news of the disappearance spread through Millhaven, but Chambers stayed silent, fearing trouble. "I meant to speak up, but Whitford sent someone to my house, telling me to keep quiet or face problems," he said, eyes sunken. When McKinnon asked why he hadn't spoken in over half a century, he shook his head. "I thought I'd buried it with time." His statement was recorded and transcribed during the interview. Chambers reviewed each line, hands trembling, and signed at the bottom. In SLED's official file, the testimony was summarized. Witness Earl Chambers confirms assisting Frederick Whitford Jr. S group at the Catfish Mill on July 15, 1946. Present when the yellow van was lowered into the pit. Witness heard Whitford mention ransom and keeping people safe overnight. Confirms Whitford was in charge. As McKinnon packed up, Chambers added a remark she noted in her memo, "I don't know what they planned, but Whitford's look that night, it wasn't of someone just hiding a truck." Chambers' simple, consistent testimony became the missing piece in the evidence chain. The first direct account confirming Whitford and his men were at the pit the night of the disappearance. The report of Earl Chambers' testimony was sent to SLED's Columbia headquarters, along with all prior physical and financial evidence. In an urgent meeting chaired by Captain Laura McKinnon, investigation team leaders presented their findings. Physical evidence. The pit where the van was found was on land leased by Whitford Timber Company. The construction materials and van structure matched invoices signed by Frederick Whitford Jr. in July 1946. Financial evidence: an unusual cash withdrawal 3 days before the disappearance. Witness evidence: Chambers' testimony confirmed Whitford directed the van's burial and mentioned ransom. All details converged on one point: Whitford Jr. was the planner and direct orchestrator. McKinnon concluded, "We have a three-pronged connection: financial, physical, witness. This is no longer suspicion, it's confirmation." The 200-plus page consolidated investigation report was sent to the South Carolina State Prosecutor's Office. SLED requested an emergency arrest warrant for Frederick Whitford Jr. on preliminary charges: first-degree murder, organized kidnapping, and obstruction of justice. State Prosecutor Harold Denton, experienced with historic cases, reviewed the file over 2 days and signed the warrant approval, noting, "Time does not erase the validity of a crime." The warrant was immediately forwarded to Jasper County Police and the Beaufort Regional Investigation Team, where Whitford resided in St. Helena's nursing home. On May 2, 2000, as the sun rose, a convoy of 3 SLED SUVs left Columbia for Beaufort. McKinnon was present, carrying copies of the warrant, evidence file, and Chambers' statement. Whitford Jr., then 78, lived in a coastal nursing home, described as quiet, in stable health, but mobility impaired. Around 9 a.m., the team arrived. The facility director was pre-notified to avoid disruption. As investigators entered, Whitford was by a window, reading a newspaper, silver hair neatly combed, demeanor calm. McKinnon introduced herself and presented the warrant. He looked up, stared for a few seconds, and said softly, "I figured it was the old business." Without resistance, he extended his hands, wrists trembling slightly, as cold handcuffs clicked shut. A nearby nurse stood frozen, unsure of what was happening. Whitford was escorted out amid curious glances from other elderly residents. In the vehicle, he said nothing, staring out the window. At Jasper County headquarters, forensics collected handwriting and fingerprint samples for comparison. Procedures were meticulous due to the case's historical significance. The press quickly reported, former Whitford timber executive arrested for 1946 disappearance. Dozens of reporters gathered outside the station, photographing the vehicle carrying the suspect. Police set up barriers, but Whitford's name dominated South Carolina's afternoon news. At the prosecutor's office, Harold Denton held a brief press conference, confirming Whitford Jr.'s indictment on 3 charges: first-degree murder, organized kidnapping, and obstruction of justice. The investigation shows the 1946 incident was not an accident. Those on the van were unlawfully confined, leading to their deaths. Current evidence supports criminal prosecution, Denton said. The preliminary indictment summarized, defendant Frederick Whitford Jr., motivated by financial gain and intent to extort, planned and directed the confinement of 16 individuals in a sealed vehicle. This led to all victims' deaths. The defendant then deliberately concealed the crime by burying the vehicle and leveraging family influence to obstruct investigation. During initial questioning at Jasper County, Whitford only confirmed his identity, declining to provide details. His family-hired lawyer immediately requested a state court hearing and cited his age and poor health for bail. The prosecution opposed, citing the charge's severity. The county judge ordered temporary detention at Beaufort's prison medical facility pending trial. That evening's news aired statewide. Millhaven's oldest residents, who witnessed the disappearance, gathered before small diner TVs. Some wept, others shook their heads, speechless. To them, Whitford had been a successful businessman, a church and school donor. Now the center of a crime they believed was a natural disaster. In SLED's Columbia office, McKinnon finalized the day's report. On the cover, she wrote in blue ink, "Primary suspect, Frederick Whitford Jr., identified via physical, financial, witness evidence. Arrest and indictment executed." At the bottom, she added a line, as if to herself, 54 years of silence, now justice begins to speak. 3 days after his arrest, Frederick Whitford Jr., was brought to a special SLED interrogation room at Jasper County headquarters. The brightly lit room held only a recorder, a water glass, and the preliminary indictment. Two investigators, Captain Laura McKinnon and Lieutenant Harold Cole, who oversaw forensics during the excavation, conducted the session. Whitford, allowed his glasses, appeared calm, despite trembling hands due to age. He was silent for a while after hearing his rights, then looked at McKinnon and said, "I knew you'd get to this point, sooner or later." His voice was hoarse but clear. McKinnon began with questions about the Catfish Swamp pit. Whitford confirmed he managed the area, overseeing the lumber storage pit and transport routes. Asked about the night of July 15, 1946, he took a deep breath, gripped the table, and said slowly, "Yes, I was there, and the van you found was ours." Whitford recounted that, in early summer 1946, he and the Sloan Brothers Company employees planned to kidnap the church students for ransom from South Carolina. At the time, Whitford Timber faced financial trouble. His father, Frederick Whitford Sr., was heavily in debt from logging expansion. Whitford Jr. believed a successful kidnapping could secure funds to save the business. He said, "We chose the kids thinking the state wouldn't ignore it. The plan was to keep them safe, get the money, and release them. No one meant to kill anyone." He described the night in detail. Late that afternoon, they used a white GMC truck to block Catfish Bridge as the church van passed. The Sloans, armed with handguns, forced driver Rayburn to stop and ordered everyone into their truck. Whitford stayed behind to drive the yellow Ford van to the prepared pit. Reinforced with planks and steel, they lowered it with a crane, intending to hold the group overnight, he said. "The rain was heavier than I expected. Water flooded in, the ground gave way. We tried to brace it, but hours later, we heard a collapse. Screams, then silence. When McKinnon asked why they didn't rescue them, he lowered his head, voice breaking, 'We couldn't. The pit was heavy, the ground kept sliding. Digging would have collapsed everything. We stood there until morning, no one could speak.' Afterward, Whitford and the others planned a cover-up. He said that the next morning, they met his father, Frederick Whitford Sr., and confessed everything. His father didn't rage, just sat silently, then said curtly, 'Tell no one. It'll be handled.' Whitford Jr. claimed his father called a friend in Jasper County's administration, the local law enforcement chief, to reframe the case as an accident. That day, the pit area was sealed for collapse risk, barring workers. 3 days later, a major storm buried the pit entirely. My father called it God's cover. He cleared all records and paid for silence," Whitford said, eyes distant. McKinnon asked him to confirm the accomplices. He replied, "The Sloan brothers. Both worked in transport. One died in a 1952 car accident, the other in 1971. No one's left to answer for it but me." Asked about the plan for ransom document, he nodded. "I wrote it. It was a draft. I meant to send a letter to the state, but after that night, there was nothing to say." He explained, they chose the Catfish pit for its seclusion, where no one would notice. The statement silenced the room. Cole noted, "Suspect confirms preparation, ransom motive, and deaths by asphyxiation in a sealed space." When McKinnon asked why he never turned himself in, Whitford looked up, voice low. "My father said the company was our family's honor. He said the truth would destroy us, and I believed him. I lived 50 years in silence, never sleeping soundly." He glanced at the one-way mirror, where SLED's legal team watched, adding, "Now you know it all. I'm not excusing it. I just want to say none of us thought they'd die." The interrogation lasted over 4 hours, all statements recorded and transcribed. At the end, Whitford signed the transcript without requesting changes. As jail staff escorted him out, he stood slowly and said to McKinnon, "I buried them and buried my life with them." SLED's official report concluded, suspect Frederick Whitford Jr. admits with 2 accomplices to planning a mass kidnapping for ransom from the state. Admits confining victims in a sealed vehicle, leading to death by asphyxiation. Confirms his father, Frederick Whitford Sr., used influence to cover up the crime and closed the case as an accident. The final line was underlined in red, "Confession given voluntarily, signed." After the interrogation and signed confession, Frederick Whitford Jr. Quote, S case moved to prosecution. The South Carolina State Prosecutor's Office formed a special task force to prepare for trial, coordinating with SLED and Jasper County's prosecutor's office. Their goal was to solidify all evidence to withstand court scrutiny, despite over half a century passing. Over 3 months, teams worked continuously in Columbia and Beaufort. First, DNA analysis from the excavated bones. SLED's forensic lab extracted viable gene segments, comparing them to living relatives' DNA, mostly descendants or distant kin. Results confirmed all 16 remains matched the 1946 Grace Baptist van passenger list, including Ruby Mae Carter and Edwin Rayburn, verifying both the site and victims. Next, the task force cataloged physical evidence, the handwritten plan for ransom student list, 1946 material invoices, and bank records of the unusual withdrawal. All were sealed, copied, and filed officially. Earl Chambers' testimony was pivotal. The only direct witness account confirming Whitford's role in the burial and mention of ransom, Chambers, summoned again, reaffirmed his statement before the state prosecutor. The forensic team finalized a comprehensive report, including a pit schematic, toxic gas analysis, and van structure, confirming death by confinement in a sealed space. Led by Harold Denton, the prosecution organized the events chronologically: ransom planning, confinement, victim deaths, and cover-up. Denton stressed Whitford's confession was legally robust, recorded and signed voluntarily, making it ironclad evidence. In the court filing, he wrote, "There is no statute of limitations for deliberate deprivation of life. Physical, financial, witness, and confessional evidence form a complete crime structure." The defense, led by Private Attorney Thomas Keene, focused on time and the defendant's health. They argued that after 54 years, human memory was unreliable, physical evidence was environmentally compromised, and Whitford's heart disease and hypertension made him physically unfit for trial. Keene requested leniency, stating justice couldn't be served by trying a dying man. He questioned Chambers' testimony, suggesting age-related memory errors. However, independent evaluations confirmed Chambers' memory and cognition were sound, with no criminal history or personal motive. The prosecution countered forcefully. In their court submission, Denton wrote, "This crime not only killed 16 innocents, but suppressed the truth for over half a century. There is no statute of limitations for deliberate murder. Time doesn't erase consequences, and age doesn't exempt responsibility." SLED provided further evidence, handwriting analysis, matching Whitford's 1940s tax documents, ink and paper tests verifying the plan for ransom documents' authenticity, and forensic confirmation the pit was deliberately built during Whitford's mill management. All were compiled into a nearly 600-page prosecution file, detailing 4 independent evidence chains pointing to one person. In August 2000, the state court set the preliminary hearing date. Prior to this, Whitford was transferred from the Beaufort Medical Detention Center to Columbia for health monitoring, with 2 officers constantly present. He remained lucid, cooperated with doctors, but refused media interviews. In Captain Laura McKinnon's journal, who had interrogated him, she noted, "Each time the case is mentioned, he doesn't resist, just sighs. No remorse, no excuses. Like someone who's decided to let the past speak for itself." In the final meeting between the prosecution and SLED before the trial, Harold Denton concluded, "We're not prosecuting an old man, but a crime that was concealed." Everyone nodded. The documents were given their final stamps and sealed in a metal crate. As McKinnon left the meeting, she glanced back at the case file on the table, thick and heavy, but to her, it was proof that justice, though slow, could return if someone had the courage to open long dusted pages. Frederick Whitford Jr.'s trial began on the morning of September 12, 2000, at the Jasper County Courthouse in South Carolina. Outside, dozens of reporters from local papers and state TV stations crowded the steps. This was deemed a resurrected case, forgotten for over half a century. In the courtroom, light streamed through high windows, illuminating the wooden table where the defendant sat. Whitford, 78, wore a gray coat, thin frame, pale face, but calm eyes. Beside him was defense attorney Thomas Keene. Across, prosecutor Harold Denton, Captain Laura McKinnon, and SLED investigators sat in a row behind sealed evidence boxes. Rayburn's letter, the carved wooden plea, and the handwritten ransom plan. The trial opened with a nearly 2-hour prosecution presentation. Denton methodically reconstructed the events from 1946 to 2000. He described how Whitford and 2 accomplices planned the mass kidnapping, how the van was lowered into the pit, and what followed: the rain, the pit's collapse, a half-century of silence. Each mention of the 16 victims lowered his voice. "They didn't die in a storm," Denton said. "They died confined in a man-made space, and that man sits here." After the summary, he requested the court display excavation photos, the rotted van frame, carefully arranged remains, and the wooden board etched with "Deliver us from this dark." The courtroom fell silent. Only the hum of the projector remained. The first witness, Earl Chambers, walked slowly with a cane, his voice trembling but clear as he recounted the night of July 15, 1946. Mentioning keeping people safe overnight and ransom, some in the gallery bowed their heads. Chambers confirmed seeing Whitford direct the van's lowering into the pit and paying him triple wages. Keene challenged his memory, but Chambers replied curtly, "I remember because I've never forgotten his look as he stared into that pit." The statement hushed the room. Whitford only closed his eyes, unresponsive. Next, forensic expert Harold Cummings presented findings. All 16 remains matched the victim's DNA. Cause of death was asphyxiation in a sealed space. He described the van's cargo bed, reinforced with oak, waterproof paint, and a blocked air vent, all indicating calculated intent. A document analyst then confirmed the plan for ransom handwriting matched Whitford's tax records. Physical, financial, and witness evidence aligned seamlessly, like completed chain links. Keene countered by emphasizing age and time. He can't recall accurately, and much evidence is degraded. He argued Whitford didn't intend murder, only a failed ransom plan leading to tragedy. When allowed to speak, Whitford stood slowly. His voice was soft but clear. "I don't deny what I did, but I never meant for them to die. I lived a lifetime in fear and regret." He paused, scanning the courtroom where victims' children and grandchildren sat silently. "My father said silence was the only way to protect the family. I believed him. But that silence was heavier than death." His words were not a defense but a final admission. The trial lasted 10 days. Nearly 20 witnesses testified, including forensic experts, land registry archivists, and McKinnon, who led the investigation. She recounted how a 2000 construction crew's chance discovery triggered the case, how mud layers were peeled back to reveal the truth. When Denton asked why she believed it was a crime, not an accident, McKinnon replied, "No storm knows how to seal a door and write a plea for help." On September 21st, the 12-person jury retired to deliberate. They took just over 3 hours. That afternoon, the courtroom's heavy atmosphere lingered as the foreperson read the verdict. After reviewing all evidence, the jury finds the defendant Frederick Whitford Jr. guilty of first-degree murder, organized kidnapping, and obstruction of justice. Sentence: life imprisonment without parole. No applause, no cheers, just a long silence, as if the courtroom exhaled together. Whitford sat still, head bowed, hands clasped. As guards approached, he whispered, audible only to those nearby, "At last, they've been heard." The verdict dominated state news. The state wrote, "Cold case after 54 years, justice for Grace Baptist." CBS Charleston called it one of South Carolina's most notable cold cases. The prosecutor's office declared the Whitford case proof that time cannot hide the truth. The official file, Cold Case 2000-1476, concluded with SLED's note, "Case closed upon verdict enforcement. Crime confirmed, justice served. As Whitford was led from the courtroom, late autumn sunlight hit the gray stone steps, glinting off his handcuffs. He walked slowly, eyes forward. McKinnon stood at the courtroom's back door, watching, feeling a chapter of history close. In her notebook, that day's final entry read 8 words. Justice comes late, but it comes. For Millhaven, the verdict ended 54 years of confusion and silence. For South Carolina's legal history, it was a rare successful cold case resolution. Proof that sometimes the past finds its voice. After the September 2000 trial, Frederick Whitford Jr.'s life sentence without parole closed a long, heavy chapter in Millhaven's history. But its ripples extended beyond the Jasper County courthouse. In the weeks that followed, the name Whitford, once tied to prosperity and status, became a symbol of betrayal and sin. The Whitford family, long influential in southern South Carolina, lost all prestige. Whitford Timber Co. Said remaining assets and land leases were seized by the state to cover old tax debts, investigation costs, and victim family reparations. The family's historic wooden house in Millhaven was sealed, later purchased by local authorities for a memorial project. The press wrote, "A dynasty of timber and power ended in crime." In the months following the sentencing, Millhaven was steeped in a mix of sorrow and relief. Many elderly residents who lived through 1946 said they felt a burden lifted, but grieved for believing a lie so long. Grace Baptist Church held a special memorial on the first Sunday of October. Victims' children and grandchildren gathered, bringing old photos, some learning the full truth only through the verdict. The new pastor read the names of the 17 lost 15 children, teacher Ruby Mae Carter, and driver Edwin Rayburn, in a quiet ceremony marked by 17 church bell tolls. South Carolina's state authorities decided to transform Whitford Timber's old mill site into a memorial. Begun in 2002, the project used materials from the old warehouse, preserving the Catfish Swamp terrain. The excavation site was reinforced with concrete, and a gray granite monument was erected, inscribed, Millhaven 17. They were silent in darkness, so we could see the light. At its base, the carved wooden plea was displayed in a sealed glass case. Each July, on the disappearance's anniversary, Jasper County schools bring students to visit. The memorial honors the victims and reminds of the consequences of concealed power. The Millhaven case was integrated into SLED's official cold case investigations training. New investigators studied evidence preservation, historical land records, and old document analysis. The over 400-page final report became an internal resource, with McKinnon's note, "Justice doesn't vanish. It's buried in files." In 2003, SLED hosted a Columbia seminar, presenting the Millhaven investigation as a model of combining modern forensics with archival research. The case was listed among 5 exemplary cold cases in the agency's annual report. In Millhaven, the case's echoes lingered in daily life. Some elderly residents felt ashamed for staying silent, especially former Whitford timber workers. They told reporters no one dared question the Whitfords then. The half-century silence sparked community discussions about responsibility, truth, and how a small town could deceive itself. Local journalists dubbed it the Millhaven syndrome, when a community chooses faith and power over facing truth. The case prompted deep changes in South Carolina's law enforcement. In 2004, the state police issued new regulations for long-term record preservation, mandating digitization of unsolved cases to prevent losing history. Informally called the Millhaven Clause, it complemented a 2004 state law affirming no statute of limitations for deliberate murder, reinforcing Denton's trial argument. For residents, the early 2000s marked a quiet revival. Millhaven rebuilt Catfish Bridge, installing a small memorial sign at its entrance. The road to Grace Baptist, River Bluff was widened, but the roadside pines were preserved, a nod to memory. At the church, a small bronze statue of Ruby Mae Carter, holding a student's hand, was erected, symbolizing compassion and resilience. The Whitford family's remaining company branches dissolved post-verdict. Frederick Whitford Jr. was transferred to a state prison's medical wing, living out his days in silence. The press rarely mentioned him, though a 2005 Charleston Chronicle feature noted, "Old man Whitford still reads the Bible every morning and never sought a reduced sentence." The author concluded, "Perhaps he knows no wall is thicker than memory." In 2006, at the first Millhaven 17 memorial anniversary, hundreds gathered by the swamp. As church bells rang, they released 17 white lilies onto the water. Many attendees had no familial ties to the victims, but came to bear witness. A young woman told a reporter, "I was born after it all, but I live with this story. We must remember, so we don't forget that silence is a sin." Though closed, the Whitford case left a lasting mark on local culture. In 2008, a PBS documentary, The Silence Beneath Millhaven, aired, recounting the investigation and truth's reconstruction. It ended with dawn over Catfish Swamp, the calm water reflecting the gray stone monument's inscription, "Justice may come late, but it never fades." Today, Millhaven is a quiet town of over 8,000, with no trace of the old timber mills. But each July, when Grace Baptist bells ring through the pines, residents pause briefly to listen. It's their way of speaking to the past, that the darkness of a half-century's silence has been replaced by the light of truth, and the memory of the 17 lost lives on in Millhaven's heart. The Millhaven 17 case is not just a tragedy buried under Catfish Swamp's mud, but a mirror reflecting how a small community can lose its conscience by choosing silence before power and prestige. In today's America, amid transparent information and free media, the case reminds us that truth doesn't emerge on its own. People must bravely pave its way. Frederick Whitford Jr. didn't just commit a crime out of greed. He knew the town would trust the moral facade his family built. For 54 years, Millhaven chose silence. Witnesses feared. Police bowed to economic power, and residents believed it was over. The lesson isn't in one man's crime but in collective complicity. When a society lets a false story persist long enough, it becomes a new truth. In modern America, facing issues like abuse of power, social injustice, or bias in the legal system, Millhaven reminds us silence is never neutral. If Earl Chambers hadn't spoken, if investigators hadn't dug into old files, justice would still lie buried with that rotted van. The most practical lesson for Americans today is speak out against wrong, even late, because every courageous act, however small, illuminates justice. Fairness, transparency, and collective memory aren't just legal values but moral foundations to prevent repeating Millhaven's darkness. Thank you for following the story of the Millhaven 17 mystery, where justice rose after over half a century of silence. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel to join us in exploring more cold cases, where truth still awaits its excavation.